And do you think we should get started? Should we give folks?
Let's go. Let's
All
do it.
right, let's do it. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen. All right. We're here tonight to share what actually gets kids into schools. And we're going to be focusing on college essays and SAT scores. Your presenters for tonight are me. I am Kim, and I'm the founder of Sharp. Prior to starting Sharp, I worked in the tech industry for many years at companies like Apple and Airbnb as a software engineer. Since then, I have worked with students both with one-on-one tutoring and by building Sharp, a mobile and web app that helps students to prepare for the SAT, whether they're studying on their own or with a tutor. And I just really like helping students to unlock their full potential. I'm a member of the National Test Prep Association, or NTPA, which is how I met Susan, actually. Susan, would you like to introduce yourself?
For sure. So thanks, Kim, and thanks for the opportunity to be here with you today. I'm Susan Napo. I am the founder and CEO of Wow Writing Workshop. We're a college essay company. We work with students, and I'll show you a little bit about our method a little bit later. We also work with professionals. So we train school counselors, we train independent counselors, we work with tutors and essay experts. And we this year will hit our 700th trainee who's gone through our program. We also do a lot of free programs, but we also work with students. So families come to us for college essay support. We do coaching. I have a small team, and I will tell you a little bit more about us later on, but I'm really pleased to be here today with Kim. So back to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Susan. That's really awesome. So for our agenda tonight, I'm going to first walk through a big picture on college admissions and the different components that are assessed there as part of that process. Next, I will talk about a plan for test prep, and then I'll hand it over to Susan, who will share how you can support your students' college essay process without hovering. And then we'd like to leave time for Q&A. If you have questions that come to you as we are talking, please feel free to post those in the chat and we'll try to cover them at the end for Q&A. So a little bit about college admissions. There's a lot of confusion out there that social media definitely doesn't help. But the things that matter when it comes to college admissions are things like course rigor, GPA, standardized test scores, college essays, extracurriculars, letters of recommendation. So, how much each of these matter, though, for any individual school really is determined by that school. And these schools will publish what's called a common data set. And that common data set shows you the relative importance of each of these different components here. So, oftentimes, these are very important for schools, but how important exactly they are varies a bit from school to school. And a note on test scores is that there are many schools who are test optional, but test optional is not the same as test blind. So while a school may not require test scores to be submitted as part of an application, many schools do prefer test scores, even if optional. And strong scores can make the difference, both in admissions and in merit scholarships. So here's a picture of a common data set, and this is from my alma mater, Dartmouth. And here you can see, as I mentioned, the different factors that are assessed as part of the application process. And here we can see things like academic rigor, class rank, GPA, standardized test scores, application essay. These are all marked as very important for Dartmouth. But different schools, of course, will have a slightly different common data set, and you can see just how important these different components are for that school, which can help you to understand, how important these are for your students' application and where you should be spending your time. But in general, I would say the standardized test and the essay are two things that a sophomore or a junior really can control as part of the process. And so is something that, as a parent, you can support your student to put their best foot forward on applications. So, talking a little bit more about test prep, there are a few factors that you need to think about when coming up with a plan for your student. So, the first is academic readiness. So, for academic readiness, I would say that students who are in ninth grade or earlier might be a little bit too early to prepare for the SAT. But the best thing you can do to support your student at that point is to help them make reading a habit because strong reading comprehension skills can really help a student to develop the skills that they'll need to do well on the SAT and ACT. On the math side of things, it's important that students have covered algebra as well as part of Algebra 2, which often occurs in 10th or 11th grade, but may be different for your student depending on their school. And so, really, I would say getting to that checkpoint of being halfway through Algebra 2 is a good time to start thinking about preparing for these standardized tests. Next, you'll want to think about setting your score targets for your student, and these vary for everyone. But in order to think about setting a good target, you want to have a sense of what your student's college list is going to look like. I put together a little tracker template, and I have a QR code here, so you can use this. But you'll want to think about the kinds of schools that your student is interested in. Do they want to stay local? Like, are you in California and they're interested in UC schools? Or do they want to go far away? Do they like an urban feel or a rural feel? All of those kinds of things. But once you have a sense of what that college list looks like, you can see for each college they have published SAT and ACT score ranges. And that can give you a good sense, in addition to whether the schools are test optional, can give you a good sense of the rough score range that your student should be targeting. And typically, you'll want your student to be, as a rough rule of thumb, in the middle 50th percent of accepted student scores. The other thing that you want to consider when thinking about target SAT or ACT scores are merit aid or merit scholarships. So here's an example of a merit aid grid from the University of Alabama. And you can see here that they outline pretty clear test scores and GPAs, as well as the actual scholarship amount awarded for those scores and GPA. So getting even 20 or 40 points more on an SAT can make the difference of like tens of thousands of dollars over 4 years of college. Now, not every school is so public about these ranges. Some are, but getting these higher scores on these tests can help not just with admissions, but also with merit money. Now, once you've decided, or once you have a rough sense of what your student's target score should look like, you'll want to get a baseline on how they're doing on these tests. So both the College Board and ACT offer free practice tests, and you can find these from their website. And when your student is taking a practice test, it's really important to try to simulate the experience that they would have on test day. So that means, no outside distractions, no outside resources, and using the timing conditions that they would have on test day. So if your student, has no accommodations, using the standard time. If they do have timing accommodations, using those as well. And one note about this is that at Sharp, we actually offer regular proctored online practice tests, and this can give students a really good way to simulate that test day experience and then get a really nice detailed report of how they did on the test. So I'll definitely share out more details about our proctored tests after this. And then once your student has taken that test, uh, they'll get a better sense of where their strong and weak areas are. If they took both an SAT and an ACT, they might see a clear preference for one test or the other. And then it's really important to not just, keep taking a lot of practice tests. That's advice I know that I definitely received when I was in high school, just take a lot of practice tests. But that's not really the best use of your students' time. The best use is really figuring out where are they losing points and what are their highest impact areas and how can they focus on those. So that's something that we've made really easy with Sharp is make it very clear where a student is strong and where they are weak and help them to focus on those weaker areas. So now I will hand it over to Susan, who will talk about college essays.
Thanks, Kim. I will now share. Oh, nope, wrong screen. Try again. That's okay. Hang on a second, everybody. Swapping over to a different sharer requires technical capabilities that sometimes, let's try this one. You just see a black screen now. This is weird. Okay, let's hang on just a moment. And I am going to get out of this view. Well, everyone, you're going to have to just see my full screen first, and then I will switch. I thought we had this all perfect. Now we got it. Okay.
Perfect.
All righty. So I'm Susan, like I said before, and we're going to talk a little bit here about first of all, what is a college essay? This is important. I think a lot of people sort of miss the point and they go straight to topics, which we're going to get into in a little bit. A college essay is your story told in your voice and your words. Very, very important. Every student has a story to tell. I was just at a conference, actually at a writing conference, had nothing to do with college admissions. And when I meet writers, I often meet people who say, oh, yeah, I help students with college essays. And I had someone, very lovely young woman who has helped many people in her family apply to college. And she said, first, they have to find their passion. And I said, no, wrong. You are wrong. That is not true. I said it more nicely than that. But it's a common misconception that there's some magic here. It is your story told in your voice, in your words, and the words that a 17-year-old high school junior, rising senior, early senior has are the best words. They're the right words. And told in that voice of a young person, it's exactly what admissions officers are looking for. So I'm sharing here, we have a 10-step method. The WOW method is 10 steps. We focus first on content, then move into structure, and finally look at polish. I'm sharing this graphic here and with this QR code because it'll be easier for you to follow along if you can see this more than just looking at it on the screen here because I'm going to move on. But our 10 steps, we developed these. I've been doing this work for 17 years. Our business has been around since 2009. And in that time, we have used this method effectively with thousands of students, whether it's us working with our own students, our colleagues who we've trained working with their students, and using a very specific method, whether it's my method or a different method, a process is really crucial. So I want you to follow along with my process so you can see what I'm talking about, and then you can apply these principles if you support your own student working on their college essays. So, how to help? How can a parent help? I'm going to tell you a story. When I started this business, I had a business partner at the time. She has since retired. She's still my friend. But at the very beginning, her nephew was applying to college, and her sister said, "So, what can I do?" And we said to her sister, "Step back, not your job, stay out of it, let us help him." And she laughed and she said, "Are you kidding me? If you don't give me a job, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do something anyway. Tell me what to do." So it really changed our perspective because originally we had said, this is not your journey. Let your child do their own work. Parents care. This matters. So we realized that really it was our job as the experts. And we talk to admissions officers all the time. Everywhere I go, I talk to admissions officers. In fact, a few weeks ago, I was doing training for admissions officers, talking to them about when they go to schools, what can they say that will really help students? Because often what they say and what students interpret, not exactly the same. So we really think a lot about what can a parent do? what can an adult who cares really do? Help your student reflect. Never tell them what to write. You might be tempted. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. Say trust yourself and really mean it. They can do this. The questions are not that hard. What's hard is there's been so much built up around the college essay that it's easy to believe that it is harder and more more challenging and so urgent more than it really is. And finally, stay calm, because if you're calm, if you've made it this far as a parent, you stay calm, they'll be more likely to stay calm. You can't say that they will always stay calm, but they'll be more likely to hold it together. So let's talk about reflection. Let's start with reflection. What do I mean by reflection? Well, let's go back to those 10 steps. By reflection, I mean start by understanding the prompt. Most people, most school counselors, most English teachers, most independent counselors, most tutors, most essay experts, so called, start with step 2. I have seen this for years. And this is not to dismiss my colleagues, because I like counselors and English teachers and tutors and essay experts. But the one thing they forget is that students have never done this before. So I understand the prompt, I understand the purpose of this essay, but my students don't. And they've probably heard things that have made them believe that this has to demonstrate their passion, that it has to show how unique they are. That's not true. In fact, recently, about a year ago, I guess it's not so recent anymore. It's almost a year ago. I was talking to an admissions officer from an elite college, and we're just casually talking. And I said, hey, tell me, what do you want me to tell my students? This is a question I ask every admissions person I ever meet. And I meet a lot of them. And he said, will you tell them to answer the question? And I laughed because I said, that's the thing. They're not actually answering the question because they don't understand how the essay fits into the application. They don't think about the fact that the application is full of information. It's full of quantitative data, your accomplishments. What have you done? How many of a certain kind of class have you taken? How far did you get in math? How many APs did you take? Do you have a job? Those things are already in the application. But what's not in the application is who you are, your characteristics. So we spend time at the beginning. I'm an educator. My background is in instructional design. I design training and learning opportunities that people can do without me or with me or with trained people. But I want to make sure that everybody understands the prompt. So in our method, every student watches a video, reads a web page, does a writing exercise that confirms understanding for every step before we move on. So if you're working with your own child or a student that you care about in any capacity, make sure, clarify, make sure there's absolute clarity on why they are writing this. And reading sample essays does not help you get there. Reading the prompt helps you get there. So what do I mean by that? These are the instructions for the Common Application Personal Statement. Common Application is an application that is used by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of schools. These are the instructions. The essay demonstrates your ability to write clearly and concisely on a selected topic and helps you distinguish yourself in your own voice. Remember, I said your story, your voice, your words. What do you want the readers of your application to know about you, apart from courses, grades, and test scores? Choose the option that best helps you answer that question and write an essay of no more than 650 words using the prompt to inspire and structure your response. This is the prompt. This is the main prompt. What do you want the readers of your application to know about you? They already have scores. They already have grades. They have activities. That does not mean that your student can't write an essay that takes place in a math classroom or on a tennis court. What it means is readers already know that they're a math star or the captain of the tennis team. So the purpose of the essay is not to share that. It's to show what kind of person they are. So where do we go from here? Well, that's the overall prompt. And then there are 7 options. We're not going to go through every single one of them, but each of these options has an element of what happened What story or example can I share? And why does it matter? Why am I telling you this? Remember, we're going back to your story, your voice, and your words. Understanding the prompt and the purpose. What's the purpose? Purpose is to share something beyond grades and scores. That's who you are, not what you've done. So I've highlighted for each of these. Let's look at number one as an example. Some students have a background, identity, interest, or talent that is so meaningful, they believe their application would be incomplete without it. If this sounds like you, then please share your story. The next one's about obstacles. The next one's about questioning or challenging a belief. Next one is about being thankful. The next one is an accomplishment that helped you grow. The next is something that really you find engaging. But let's look at number one again. A background, anything about your background, an identity. Who are you? How do you identify? An interest. I like ladybugs. I like cooking. I like dancing. I like, anything, astronomy. Or a talent. I'm a star, fill in the blank. I'm a tap dancer. I make movies. I am excellent at hockey. It doesn't matter. A background and identity and interest or a talent are equally valuable. It doesn't matter which one it has, but that is so meaningful. Your application would be incomplete without it. If I didn't know this about you, I wouldn't really know you. So each of these prompts is a door or a window for students to enter, but to actually answer this. What do you want the readers of your application to know about you? It doesn't matter which one they pick. There is no better prompt. There is no preferred prompt. There's no, oh, most people do this one, they should do that one. What you have to make sure is that you answer all the parts. So, for example, number two, the lessons we take from obstacles can be fundamental to later success. So, we need an obstacle and we need later success. We recount a time, one time, when you faced a challenge, a setback, or a failure. A challenge, something challenged me, was hard. A setback, I was moving forward, but then I lost ground. Or a failure, I did something and it totally bombed, it didn't work. It doesn't matter though if it's a challenge, a setback, or a failure. Bigger is not better. More impressive is not better. No, this one has two parts, and often students will skip the second part. They talk about the challenge, the setback, or the failure, and they forget the how did it affect you and what did you learn? In which case, I will always prompt my students to share, and what did you do next time? Or how did it make you think differently? Don't just tell me I learned. What did you learn? How do I know that you learned this? So each of these has something behind it. And before students start brainstorming ideas, they really need to think about the prompt. Take their time. And just asking 3 questions. These are 3 questions. Like I said, every student that we work with watches a brief video. They're like 30 seconds, 30 to 90 seconds, reads a web page, does a writing exercise. The writing exercise for step one only asks 3 questions. One, what is the Common App prompt for? Why are you writing this? And that answer is they want to know something about me beyond grades and scores that I showed you on the previous slide. Next, what do they already know about you? And we give examples even. And this isn't a test. I'm not trying to trick them, but I want to make sure that they really understand. And I say, what scores did you get? What SAT score did you get? What kind of classes have you taken? What kind of school do you go to? So this is what they already know. The next question is, what would you like them to know? If a student can answer all 3 of those questions, then they're ready to brainstorm topics, because then they're going to come up with topics that can be effective. So here I go to my number 2. Don't tell your student what to write. Make sure they understand the prompt and help them brainstorm ideas. We are in step 2. Consider several topics, and for each, consider the prompt. Which of these? Now we're looking at one of these 6. Am I talking about an obstacle? Am I talking about an accomplishment? Am I talking about an interest? An anchor story. And by anchor story, I mean a story, some little something, a moment, one story. You don't need 3. This is not a paper where you're trying to prove something. You don't need a thesis with 3 paragraphs and a conclusion. The anchor story holds the essay in place and it makes review easier later. So if you're going to look at your students' essay later as they write drafts, you want to be able to go back to that anchor story. The anchor story may or may not be the whole essay. That's not the point. It's to get them started and to make sure they have characteristics. So let me give you an example. When I said before, don't tell your student what to write, I had a student last year who came to me with 4 ideas. He was working with us. He had watched his videos. He did his work. Everything was on time. Very, very responsible student. And he brought 4 ideas. And I looked at them when we sat down to brainstorm because we're going to pick one. Which one is he actually going to pursue and write about? And they were really interesting. One of them was about it was about working on Capitol Hill and lobbying. The other one was about volunteering, and one. I mean, they were very impressive. And as he walked me through them, for each one, he said, "No, this one is a challenge, and this one is my identity, and this one." And he went through them, and he gave me the stories and shared the characteristics. There's something kind of basic, and like there wasn't a lot of depth. So as we're talking, I said, "When did these things happen?" Well, it turned out that 3 out of 4 of them had happened when he was in middle school. Nothing wrong with things that happened in middle school. I said, okay, if this story about lobbying, for example, he went to like lobbying day to meet his Congress members. I said, so what happened after that? You were 11 when you did that. You're 17 now. So I'm assuming that you're the same kind of person you were then. What did you do with it? What happened next? Did you continue lobbying? Did you get interested in politics? Because what I'm trying to do here is not tell him, oh, for heaven's sake, don't tell me about when you were 11. I'm trying to say, I can guide you. I'm an educator. I'm thinking, can I move him into the next idea, a stronger idea, by using where he started? I don't want to shut him down. I want to open him up. So he's like, well, not really. And for each story, it was like, well, not really. I don't know. I said, who helped you with this? Again, not accusatory, but I'm like, these ideas don't sound interesting to him. He said, oh, my mom helped me. Well, here's what happened. This is a student who thought he couldn't write and he has some trouble in school sometimes. And he and his mom thought, well, I'll come up with better ideas if you do this with me. And what she did, the reason I say, don't tell your student what to write, because as a parent, you're thinking about your favorite stories about your child. I've seen this over and over and over. These are the stories that we tell about you that show how wonderful you are. But a student who understands the prompt can come up with a more effective idea. So I said to him, okay, in step 1, you said you're the kind of person who likes to talk to people and you're really curious. And here's my phrase, parents. This is the one I use all the time. Tell me about a time when you were curious and interested in other people. Those are good characteristics. Even if you know about a time, you can say, well, tell me about a time when you did that, or tell me about a time when you behaved that way. And he lit up. He said, I know, driver's ed. I'm like, great. Because who would think you're going to write your college essay about driver's ed? He says, last week I was at driver's ed and I was driving and a new teacher. And I've had the same teacher all through, like every week I drive with the same guy, but it was a different teacher. And I'm feeling pretty confident it was my last lesson. And something controversial had happened in their town. I don't remember what it was. And he said, so I asked him about it. And wow, his ideas totally opposite of what I believe. And it was really cool. And I listened to him. I was curious, like, why would he think that? But I was really respectful. And we had such an interesting conversation. He got really animated, way more than when he was telling me about his ideas. And I said, well, you got it. He said, I can write about that. I said, it's not about driver's ed. It's about you. It demonstrates who you are. And this is really crucial for families to understand, he had a good list. He had a list of schools that he was qualified for, that he would likely get into most or all of them. So the essay is not going to vault anybody over the wall. It's going to be a piece of a comprehensive package. And in his case, he wrote a beautiful essay. He wrote a beautiful, beautiful essay. So focus on theme is our third step. What happened? I was in driver's ed and I had a discussion about a controversial topic with my teacher. Why does it matter? Because I am the kind of person who's curious about others and likes to talk about new ideas. That's it. I don't know what the essay is about at that point. If I had not actually talked to him, it doesn't matter. But that theme is going to hold us in place, is going to make sure that he knows what he wants to write about and why. At this point, I can say, trust yourself. I'm not his parent, of course, I'm his coach, but you can do this. Once they have an idea that will work, you need to sit on your hands and not say, well, let's think about 17 other ideas that could work. Any idea that balances those elements, the prompt, the anchor story, the characteristic, that's an effective college essay. That's an effective, and by effective, I mean an essay that will work, an essay that will do its job, because an essay has a job to do. For those of you who've ever written a grant application, it's more grant application than creative nonfiction. And I am a poet and an essayist and a creative writing teacher, and I love teaching kids to write. They do learn to write using our process, but it's not the pressure to make something beautiful. It's the opportunity to share their story in a way that feels authentic to them. And that's what matters, because a confident student will write several drafts. A confident student will be able to say to the well-meaning adult, "No, that's not exactly what I wanted, but thanks for your feedback." Or will graciously be able to say, "Oh, you know what? That suggestion is really going to help me accomplish what I want." That confident student is going to be able to write all of the Common App essay and the UCPIQs. The University of California has personal insight questions, which are a whole other animal, similar but not exactly. Many schools have supplemental essays. There's a lot of writing involved when students apply to college. So I need them to feel good about their ideas from the beginning. So here are those 10 steps again. Let's look at this. I've been focusing on the green, on the content. Why do we do it this way? Like I said, I'm a writing teacher from way, way back. And what I've learned is that if I stay away from the typical, this sentence should be first, and you're missing a comma, and all of that, my students will focus and again will gain confidence and will go deeper and will try harder and will experiment more. So the structure and the polish, this is often where people start. This is often what happens. They start here, they brainstorm ideas, they jump all the way to the draft. They don't focus on theme, they don't do any free writing. And then they do kind of a mashup of all of this stuff here. They go into they're into all the parts that are easy to comment on, the structure and the polish. Don't go there. Stay in content first. We even have writing exercises that we have our students do specifically focused on content because we know that every student can benefit from them. So make sure the content is solid before you start making comments and reviewing it. Because you get too far ahead, and it's hard to revise your way out of a poorly conceived idea. So you want to make sure that everything is solid. And then the revision process, that's the easy part. So we've talked about help your student reflect. Don't tell your student what to write. Say trust yourself and really trust them. Get the right guidance. What do I mean by getting the right guidance? I mean, I'm the right guidance. You can call me. This is not a sales pitch. I want to make sure that if you get outside help or if you are the help yourself, make sure that you have a process in mind. Let's talk about ideas and go write your draft and come back and show me when you're ready. Don't do that. That's how kids end up writing their college essay all summer. They write 12 drafts, they show it to everyone they know. Dad's got feedback, mom's got feedback, Aunt Lucy has feedback, my sister has feedback, my cousin whose boyfriend goes to the school I want to go to has feedback, and it's just a big mess. It's really hard. A process, focus on content first, confirm understanding of the prompt, have a plan. What do I mean by plan? So here's the process. I showed you a process. I've now given you one. You can use it with my blessing. Plan. Where are you applying? What does your summer look like? How motivated are you? When we work with students, we do a weekly report. And the weekly report is the student is supposed to be here because I'll show you a sample schedule. They're supposed to be here. They're actually here. They're ahead. They're behind, whatever. Things are going on. they're disappearing for 6 weeks and going to work as a camp counselor, or they have double football practices or whatever it is. And how motivated are they? So by this we measure willingness and ability. Think about this carefully. Where is your child applying? What does the summer look like? Do they have time? Momentum is your friend here. I'd rather have a student wait till they get back from camp and start in August than start in June and worry about it all summer and then pick up again and say, oh, I'm not sure if I like my idea. Don't do that. Momentum is your friend. And how motivated are they? Think about willingness to do the work and ability. This does not need to be a masterpiece. These do not need to be masterpieces. These need to be authentic writing written from a student's perspective. I've looked back at essays written by students who have since graduated. I said I've been doing this for 17 years. When I started, my children were small and I was working with their babysitters. And now my youngest graduated from college last year. So I've been at every stage of this. And I look at writing. Sometimes we work with graduate students. So I look at the writing of students who I worked with when they were in high school. And then I see what it looks like once they're out of college. And it's different. Even the strongest writers, even the creative writing majors, they sound like 17-year-old creative writing kids. And that's what they should sound like. And the engineers and the math kids and the ones who say, I'm like a science kid and I don't care about writing and oh my gosh, I hate to write. They like this too, this idea of having a process, a plan, and a schedule because it's methodical and it keeps folks on track. So, a schedule. Here's a sample of my schedule. So, we do a standard 4-week schedule for the Common Application personal statement. I show you this because you don't have to go to this level of detail, but I want you to understand that, like I said, just saying, yeah, let's sit down and talk about it and go write and bring it back to me, it's not a good idea. How did we come up with this schedule? This is such a long time ago, probably 12 years ago. A mom called us and said, so when is my son going to be done? He's been working with you all for like 7 weeks on his Common App personal statement, and school's about to start. And he was a kid who kind of dragged his feet and he procrastinated, and we didn't want to like make him feel bad, and we'd remind him, and that was a whole summer of that, a lot of reminders and calling his mom and sending him texts and whatever. And we said, oh, you know what, he should be done. And we thought, how long does it really take? So we did our own time study and we paid a lot of attention to each of our exercises and how long should they take and how long did we need to respond. And some of the things that we assign will say, oh, we assign it on Monday, but it's due on Wednesday. We assign it on Thursday, it's due on Sunday. It's all intentional. So I'm not saying that you have to go to this level of detail, but when I say get the right help, make sure that whoever you're working with has a process, pays attention to the plan, and has a schedule. So we're going to meet every Thursday until she's done. Bad idea. Don't do that because it's hard to revise when you're sitting next to someone, when you're sitting next to a person who's giving you feedback. Students will absorb the feedback from the person sitting next to them. Writing is a thing that happens alone with specific focused feedback given out in bite-sized pieces by someone who really knows what they're talking about. So when you're looking for support, even your cousin who's an editor at the New Yorker is not an expert on college essays. Your school counselor knows a lot about college essays, may or may not have time to support your student. If you look for an independent counselor, make sure that they have a process for college essays, not just we'll get to it when we get to it, because that will help you stay calm, which will help your students stay calm. And really, my goal is for everybody to have a calmer summer, a better summer, a better senior year, and more time to really do the things that matter. Once students are applying to college, it's a lot of pressure. There's a lot going on. And I think that Kim and I can agree that we want your student to be successful and to get what they want, which hopefully is to get into a college that they are interested in, and to go on from there. So we'll welcome your questions. If you don't have questions, I have plenty more things I can talk about. but I want to make sure that we do have time to answer your questions. So put them in the chat if you can. Thanks. I will say while you're doing that, or if you're doing that, I want to address one thing that I've been speaking a lot about lately, and that is AI in college essays. So if someone's not going to ask the question, I'm going to ask the question, what about AI? So here's the thing about AI. Right now, right now, as all the large language models and all the college essay specific AI tools, and there's a lot of them out there, I have tested them all. I've talked to the people who make some of them. The only thing they can do right now is tell your student what to write and revise their work. Those are the only two things any of the AI tools can do so far. They are not thought partners. I don't care how much detail you put in. I am a student applying to college X and I am answering Common App question 3 and I want them to know that I am a great problem solver and da 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 da. It's still not going to give you great feedback. All they can do right now, they can ask you a ton of questions. And there are counselors who will do this too, who I actually train them and I try to train it out of them. And I say, you don't need to ask so many questions. You're not mining for diamonds. You need to be teaching students how to think about prompts. So if a student can write the Common App personal statement going through this process and knowing that understanding the prompt first is most important, then when I show them the prompts for the University of Michigan, for example, and one of them is, why are you interested in, it's a more detailed question than this, basically this program, this major, this opportunity. That's one of the questions. And the other one is about leadership and where you've been and where you're going. We can look at those strategically because students have learned how to read a prompt. Answering 500 questions about your favorite place and 6 challenges you faced and what you like to do in your spare time, and then having an AI or a person spit out answers doesn't help students think. It doesn't tell them why an idea can work. And in fact, it's kind of random. I've played with them and I found that their suggestions are kind of mediocre. The feedback has varies by tool. And what I have found is that the feedback is too much. It's like opening a fire hydrant. It's content, structure, and polish all at once. I used to give feedback like that. I'm a great writing teacher. I would see so many things in my students' work, and I would tell them everything I saw, and they wouldn't do it. They would take the first 3 suggestions and then they would stop. And then I'd have to give it to them again, and then they would stop. And I thought, wait a minute, I'm giving them too much. So my word about AI, it's not evil. It's not the end of writing. It can't do this. At least it can't do it well. And so I think that it's important to keep that in mind. So we've got a couple questions. Kim, why don't you answer the one about SAT first, and then I'll talk about the hook.
Sure. So just quick clarification. We have a question in the chat from Sabrina that's, can you talk about SAT score or super score? I'm going to interpret this as being separate from, can you talk about that in college essays? Interpreting this as, can I talk about it? So I can definitely
Because I
talk.
can't talk about it.
Yeah, I can
Oh, can you
definitely.
talk about it? No, I don't think the
I
question is,
don't
can
think
you write
it's,
about
yeah,
that?
I know. I'm like, so about SAT scores, I would say a lot of parents will ask me what is a good SAT score, and unfortunately, the answer to that is typically it depends. It very much depends on your student and the kinds of colleges that they are targeting. I could give, rules of thumb, and I have a blog post on my website that I'll find and share in the chat shortly that gives kind of a rule of thumb for how to interpret different SAT ranges and how competitive they are for different kinds of schools. But then I can definitely talk about super scoring. Super scoring is awesome, and most schools support super scoring. And the gist of super scoring is that you can take the best of your section scores across different test dates and combine them. So, to give an example, a student could get a 700 on reading and writing one day and a 500 on math, and then they take the test another time and they get a 600 on math but a lower score on English, they can take that 600 on math and 700 from English and combine those into a 1300 super score. Um, and then I can take the next question because it is
Yeah, go ahead.
thematically related from Elle in the chat, which is, do colleges require students to share all SAT or ACT scores they've ever taken? And the answer is almost always colleges do not require you to submit all scores. Typically, you can submit just the best scores. I think there are two common exceptions to this rule, which are Georgetown and MIT. I think are the two only schools that I can remember that will ask a student to submit all scores. But the vast, vast majority of schools do not require you to submit all scores.
think you
Uh,
got another one. Go ahead.
Got
Since
another
we're on
one.
the
All right.
SAT theme,
We're
go
on
ahead.
a streak. Sabrina's question in the chat is, would you suggest the student start taking the SAT in the beginning of 10th grade? Um, I shared earlier a little bit on academic readiness for the SAT. I would say it depends on uh, the student's math level. So if that student has taken Algebra 2 already, then I would think they could start preparing for the SAT in the beginning of 10th grade. If they have not taken Algebra 2 or they are currently in Algebra 2, I'd recommend making it halfway through that course before starting SAT prep. Great questions.
Good. And I will answer Sabrina's question. How do you find the hook in the essay? So I will assume that by hook you mean like a great first line or something that really grabs you. You don't. And this is coming from a person who loves to read and loves compelling writing. You don't need a hook. A hook, I like to say the hook is a red herring. The hook distracts you from what matters. Like I said, I ask admissions officers all the time, what do you want me to tell my students? And I get that. Will you tell them to answer the question? Will you tell them I just want that, to hear their authentic voice? And I say, okay, tell me more about that. What do you mean by what authentic voice? They said, I just want to hear them tell me about who they are. And I say, well, do you need like an amazing first paragraph where you won't keep reading? And they say, no, I read them. I read them quickly, but I don't need to be hooked. So students spend too much time, unfortunately, worrying about the glitter on the outside of the essay rather than the substance of the essay, which is what am I going to tell you about and why? If the why is clear, we don't need gimmicks to get attention. Admissions, I have another presentation I do sometimes where I have quotes from different schools. I promise you, they read them all. They really do. They don't ask for things they don't need. I have talked to admissions officers who are spectacular writers and readers who say, I do not sit with a red pen. I am not correcting their grammar. I'm not looking for you to knock my socks off. Now, every admissions officer that you will ever talk to will tell you about their favorite essays. And I actually advise them not to. And they look at me and they say, what are you talking about? I say, because when you talk about your favorite essays, you talk about the memorable essays. Are the only kids who got into your school the ones who wrote memorable essays? And they say, well, of course not. Some of the most basic and mundane essays those students have gotten into. And I say, again, back to the what you hear and what they say and what you hear. I say, when you share those examples, they think they need to sound like that. The reason those are your favorites are because they stand out. I said, if you want to talk about, like I told you the story about my student who, his driver's ed essay, it was basic writing. He was not a spectacular writer. He could communicate. He wrote well enough, and he was perfectly qualified for the schools he wanted to go to. So if you are ambitious and you want your child wants to go to Harvard or MIT or the University of Michigan or UCLA, yeah, their writing has to be stronger, but I will assume that their writing is stronger because they are qualified to go to one of those schools. And if you say, well, my child, is not a great writer, then maybe they might seem qualified, but they're not going to get in. They are comparable to other qualified students. I read a lot of writing by high school students, and the stuff I love is the writing that sounds like the student who wrote it. And that's what we're looking for rather than a hook. So it's not bad if there is one, but it's not something to aspire to. But thanks for the question because I think a lot of people assume that you need some magnificent opening to grab the reader's attention, and that's not true. Any other questions? We're getting close to the end of our time. Let's see. So grammar isn't important. Oh, no, no. And we don't have to use hard words. You don't have to use hard words. Grammar matters. I mean, I would do a basic grammar and spelling check. You don't want to be messy. That's polish. When we talk about polish, and we have very, very clear guidelines for polish that we use and that we train counselors on, we're looking for consistency. If you use, what's known as the Oxford comma, then use it. If you don't use it, don't use it. If you know how to use a semicolon, great. If you don't know how to use a semicolon, then don't. Make sure your words are spelled properly. You have the correct its or its, but you don't have to use hard words. And you don't need to go to the thesaurus and find a better word. Now, I will tell students you have too many adverbs. I'd like you to get rid of the varies. I'd like you to get rid of as many of the ly words as you can. Sometimes that's for word count. Sometimes that's for just I want it to be more. I want it to move more fluidly, and I want to be able to teach them that. Now, remember, I talked about willingness and ability. If I have a student who can't handle that, I'm not going to push it. Having the word very in your essay is not going to get you kicked out of the list. You're not going to knock it into Yale because you used an adverb in your essay. But it's important to know to really weigh what matters. Kim, it looks like you got one more.
One more question. Yeah. So another question from Sabrina. I have another SAT question. Is there any grammar workbook to focus on the SAT? That is an excellent question. I will say there is one, if you would like a book, like a physical book, Erica Meltzer has a great guide to SAT grammar, and I've used that resource a lot myself and with students. So I think that is an excellent grammar resource. My app, Sharp, has a lot of practice grammar questions as well. So that can be another resource that students can use and start for free to practice grammar for the SAT.
Sounds good.
Any other questions?
Looks like we're done.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. And thank you, Susan. This was so much fun. And
Thanks,
I
Kim.
hope everyone has a great week ahead.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye. Thanks.